Prophecy Decoded. Decoded the past, reveal the future.
A classified document that crossed my desk 3 days ago has left me absolutely speechless. What I discovered in those pages will revolutionize everything we thought we knew about the Temple Mount and expose a systematic cover-up that reaches to the highest levels of archaeological authority. Deep beneath Judaism's holiest site, secret foundation work has been occurring for months, creating a vast network of tunnels that may connect directly to chambers from the First Temple period. Yet not a single word of this has reached public attention until now. The document, leaked by a courageous insider within the Israel Antiquities Authority, details an extensive underground operation that began in late 2024 under the cover of routine maintenance work. Using advanced ground-penetrating radar and robotics that literally fulfill Daniel's prophecy about knowledge increasing in the end times, engineers have mapped tunnels that extend far beyond anything previously documented beneath the Temple Mount. What absolutely stunned me about this discovery is not just the sophistication of the tunnel network, but the deliberate efforts to conceal its true purpose from international observers and religious communities worldwide. The official reports describe basic structural repairs, but the leaked documents reveal something far more significant involving ritual chambers, ceremonial passages, and underground spaces that align perfectly with biblical descriptions of Solomon's temple infrastructure. In my 4 decades of studying ancient manuscripts and archaeological evidence, I have never encountered such a coordinated attempt to suppress findings could validate Hebrew Israelite claims about their authentic connection to ancient Israel. The tunnels include carved stone chambers with Hebrew inscriptions, ritual pools for ceremonial purification, and artifact storage areas that contain materials dating back 3 millennia. The timing of this secret foundation work cannot be coincidental. We are living in the prophetic season when hidden things are being revealed and ancient knowledge is being uncovered through technological capabilities that our ancestors could never have imagined. These tunnels were discovered and explored because divine providence ordained that this generation would have the tools necessary to uncover suppressed truth. The artifacts and architectural features documented in this secret foundation work tell a story that mainstream archaeology desperately wants to suppress. Stone altars with ancient Hebrew script, ceremonial vessels matching Levitical descriptions, and most significantly, evidence of worship practices that align perfect with traditions preserved within Hebrew Israelite communities generations for, despite academic dismissal and institutional marginalization. What makes this revelation even more explosive is the connection between these newly exposed tunnels and existing underground networks that have been explored since the 19th century. The secret foundation work has revealed that these separate tunnel systems actually connect, creating a vast underground infrastructure that supports biblical accounts of temple-related activities and Hebrew Israelite religious practices. The restricted access to information about this foundation work raises serious questions about what additional evidence remains hidden from public scrutiny. If these tunnels contain proof of Hebrew Israelite identity and worship practices that challenge conventional historical narratives, why are independent researchers being denied access to study them? Have you ever wondered why certain archaeological discoveries receive extensive media coverage while others, like this secret foundation work, are kept completely hidden from public view? The pattern suggests a deliberate effort to control narratives about ancient Israel and suppress evidence that might validate Hebrew Israeli claims about their ancestral heritage and prophetic destiny in these end times. The leaked documents describe technological breakthroughs that enabled this underground exploration, including advanced imaging systems and remote sensing capabilities that can map subsurface structures without disturbing the politically sensitive religious site above. This represents the literal fulfillment of ancient prophecy about technological advancement, revealing hidden truth. The ritual implements and ceremonial features documented in this secret foundation work include bronze vessels, stone altars with Hebrew inscriptions, and water systems designed for purification rituals that match precisely with Levitical requirements for Hebrew Israelite worship. This isn't coincidental similarity, but direct evidence of cultural and religious continuity spanning 3 millennia. As we examine this explosive evidence together, you'll discover why this secret foundation work represents more than archaeological investigation. It's a divine revelation timed for this generation, providing tangible proof of Hebrew Israelite authenticity, just as ancient prophecies predicted that scattered Israel would be regathered and their true identity revealed through the world through the uncovering of hidden things. The biblical descriptions of temple construction in 1 Kings and Chronicles include specific references to underground chambers, foundation rooms, and ceremonial spaces that correspond remarkably with the architectural features documented in this secret foundation work. These aren't random storage areas, but carefully designed ritual spaces integral to Hebrew Israelite worship practices during the monarchy period. Ezekiel's detailed vision of the restored temple in chapters 40 through 48 includes measurements and descriptions of underground chambers that align precisely with the diet discovered through the secret foundations and later through foundation work. The prophet's vision describes hidden chambers and foundation rooms that match both the size and function of the spaces now being mapped beneath the Temple Mount. The Dead Sea Scrolls contain multiple references to concealed sacred spaces and hidden chambers connected to temple worship. The Temple Scroll specifically describes underground facilities used for ritual preparation and ceremonial storage, suggesting that such spaces were essential components Hebrew Israelite religious infrastructure during the Second Temple period and earlier. Josephus documented extensive underground facilities connected to the temple complex in his first-century writings, describing chambers used for ritual preparation and sacred storage that match the archaeological evidence now emerging through this secret foundation work. His historical accounts provide validation for the significance of the underground network being explored beneath Jerusalem. The Copper Scroll from Qumran lists 64 locations where temple treasures and sacred objects were hidden, possibly including the very chambers now being accessed through this secret foundation work. The scroll's descriptions of concealed ritual spaces align with the underground infrastructure being documented by the leaked archaeological reports. The Mishnah contains detailed requirements for ritual purification procedures that would have needed exactly the type of facilities being discovered through this foundation work. Tractate Mikvot describes specific requirements for ceremonial baths that correspond precisely with the stone-carved pools documented in the classified reports. Extra-biblical texts, including the books of Enoch and Jubilees, reference hidden sacred spaces where important ritual objects and documents were preserved during times of persecution. These texts suggest that underground chambers served both active worship functions and preservation purposes for sacred materials. exactly matching what the secret foundation work has revealed. The architectural sophistication documented in the classified reports demonstrates advanced engineering knowledge that aligns with biblical descriptions Hebrew Israeli capabilities during the unified monarchy. The precision of stone carving, sophisticated water management systems, and astronomical alignments all point to a civilization with remarkable technical abilities that support biblical accounts of Solomon's wisdom and building projects. The preservation of Hebrew inscriptions within these chambers provides direct linguistic evidence connecting the site to Hebrew Israelite culture and religious practice. These inscriptions include references to sacred observances and ritual procedures that match traditions preserved within contemporary Hebrew Israelite communities worldwide. The dating of artifacts documented in the secret foundation work places their creation during the height of the Hebrew kingdom, corresponding to the reigns of David and Solomon, when Jerusalem served as the political and religious center of ancient Israel. This timing validates biblical chronology and supports the historical authenticity of Hebrew Israelite claims about their ancestral connection to this sacred site. The discovery of ritual implements specifically designed for Hebrew Israelite worship practices validates the continuity of religious tradition from ancient times to the present. Bronze vessels, stones, and ceremonial tools documented in the classified reports match descriptions from both biblical texts and oral traditions preserved within Hebrew Israelite communities. The water systems within the underground complex demonstrate the central importance of ritual purification in Hebrew Israelite religious practice, supporting biblical requirements for ceremonial cleansing and validating the authenticity of traditions maintained by contemporary Israelite communities throughout the global diaspora. The positioning of these chambers relative to other known Jerusalem archaeological sites suggests that they formed part of a larger sacred infrastructure spanning temple worship and Hebrew and heathens observance during the first of Prophetic religious temple period, exactly as described in biblical accounts of Solomon's building projects and religious reforms. Modern technological capabilities have enabled this secret foundation work through advanced methods that were impossible just years ago. Ground-penetrating radar, three-dimensional imaging, and remote sensing technologies allow researchers to map underground structures and identify significant archaeological features without invasive excavation that might trigger international political incidents. The use of robotics and advanced imaging systems in this foundation work has revealed architectural details and spatial relationships that would be impossible to document through traditional excavation methods. These high-resolution scans provide unprecedented insight into the planning and construction of ancient Hebrew Israelite religious facilities beneath Jerusalem. Carbon dating analysis of organic materials found during this secret work has confirmed the antiquity of the underground complex, placing its construction during the early monarchy period, when Jerusalem first became the capital of United Israel. This dating supports biblical chronology and validates Hebrew Israeli historical claims about their ancestral presence in this location. Advanced chemical analysis of artifacts documented during the foundation work has revealed their geographical origins and manufacturing techniques, providing insights into ancient trade networks and technological capabilities that support the sophisticated civilization described in biblical accounts of Hebrew Israelite society during its golden age. Three-dimensional modeling and virtual reconstruction technologies enable researchers to visualize the complete underground complex and understand how its various components function to port Hebrew to Israel Hebrew ritual practice. These reconstructions validate biblical descriptions of temple-related facilities and worship procedures that have been preserved within Hebrew Israelite communities. Database integration and comparative analysis enable researchers to connect the Jerusalem discoveries with similar findings from other Hebrew Israelite sites throughout the ancient Near East, demonstrating the widespread scope of this civilization and validating claims about Hebrew Israelite cultural influence that extend far beyond conventional geographical boundaries. Non-invasive survey methods continue to reveal additional features and structures within the complex, suggesting that future phases of this secret foundation work will uncover even more evidence supporting Hebrew Israelite historical authenticity and religious continuity from ancient times to the present. The application of artificial intelligence and pattern recognition algorithms to data from this foundation work has identified previously unnoticed connections between the Jerusalem complex and other ancient sites, revealing evidence of Hebrew Israelite presence and influence across much broader geographical areas than previously recognized by mainstream scholarship. The precision of measurements and proportional relationships within the underground complex demonstrates mathematical and architectural knowledge that supports Hebrew accounts of Hebrews during the Bonatridine thousands Archaeologies during technical Prophetic period, challenging assumptions about ancient technological limitations that have been used to dismiss biblical historical accounts. Recent genetic research has provided unprecedented insights into ancient population movements and ethnic relationships throughout the Middle East that complement the archaeological evidence emerged from this secret foundation work. Studies of ancient know extracted from burial sites throughout the Levant reveal complex patterns of ancestry and migration that support Hebrew Israelite claims about their historical presence and diaspora experiences. The analysis of genetic material from First Temple period burial sites has yielded profiles that demonstrate continuity between ancient Levantine populations and contemporary communities and the global Africa and the global diaspora. These findings support the possibility of ancient connections between Hebrew Israelites and African populations that align with oral traditions preserved within contemporary Hebrew Israelite communities worldwide. Mitochondrial DNA analysis has identified genetic markers shared between ancient Middle Eastern populations and contemporary African communities, suggesting ancient migration patterns that could account for Hebrew Israelite presence throughout Africa and eventual dispersal to the Americas through documented historical population movements, including the Atlantic slave trade. Y chromosome studies have revealed paternal lineages that connect ancient Levantine populations with contemporary African and African American communities, providing genetic evidence that supports claims of Hebrew Israelite ancestry among populations that have maintained these identity narratives through generations of oral tradition and community preservation. Comparative genomic analysis between ancient samples from the Jerusalem area and contemporary DNA from Hebrew Israelite communities has identified shared genetic markers that suggest possible ancestral connections. Though the complexity of ancient population genetics requires careful interpretation of these correlations within proper scientific and historical contexts. Population genetics modeling has demonstrated that ancient Middle Eastern communities were far more diverse and mobile than previously understood by mainstream scholarship, creating opportunities for genetic and cultural connections between Hebrew Israelites and African populations that could explain contemporary claims of ancestral heritage among diaspora communities. The analysis of ancient migration patterns through genetic evidence has revealed extensive movement of populations between the Middle East, Africa during periods corresponding to biblical exile and diaspora, supporting the possibility of African connections among scattered, the Hebrew populations that maintained their identity through oral tradition. Studies of genetic diversity within ancient Levantine populations have shown that Hebrew Israelites would have included individuals with varied ancestry reflecting the cosmopolitan nature of ancient Near Eastern civilizations, challenging assumptions about ethnic homogeneity and supporting more inclusive understandings of Hebrew identity that align with contemporary Hebrew Israelite claims. The identification of genetic markers associated with ancient priesthood and tribal affiliations has provided new tools for understanding Hebrew Israelite social organization and religious hierarchy, though the interpretation of these findings remains subject to ongoing research and debate within both scientific and religious communities. Paleogenomic reconstruction of ancient population movements has created detailed maps of genetic flow between regions that correspond with biblical accounts of Hebrew Israelite dispersal and migration, providing scientific validation for traditional narratives about diaspora and exile have been preserved within Hebrew Israelite communities. The integration of genetic evidence with archaeological findings from this secret foundation work creates more comprehensive pictures of ancient Hebrew Israelite society that support both biblical accounts and oral traditions preserved within contemporary communities carrying these claims throughout the global diaspora. Ancient DNA studies have revealed the presence of Middle Eastern genetic markers within African populations at time depths that predate the Atlantic slave trade, suggesting earlier connections that could support Hebrew Israelite claims of ancient African presence and cultural transmission across geographical boundaries. The analysis of genetic variation within contemporary Hebrew Israelite communities has identified patterns that suggest shared ancestry and validate claims of common heritage among geographically separated populations that have maintained similar cultural and religious traditions despite centuries of displacement and marginalization. Cross-generational genetic studies within Hebrew Israelite families have demonstrated the preservation of specific genetic markers that align with ancient Middle Eastern populations, supporting claims of authentic ancestral connections maintained through family lineages and community traditions that complement the archaeological evidence from the secret foundation work. Hebrew Israelite communities throughout the United States and Africa have embraced the leaked revelations about this secret foundation work as divine confirmation of ancestral traditions that have been preserved through generations of faithful transmission, despite centuries of suppression and marginalization by mainstream religious and academic institutions refuse to acknowledge their authentic heritage. The tribe of Judah holds central significance within Hebrew Israelite theology and identity, with Genesis 49:10 establishing this lineage as the source of royal authority and messianic expectation. African American Hebrew Israelite communities have particularly identified with Judah's legacy as representing courage, leadership, and divine calling in the face of adversity and persecution throughout their historical experience. Contemporary Hebrew Israelite festivals and religious observances incorporate specific elements that communities claim derive directly from ancient Judahite practices preserved through cultural transmission. The secret foundation work beneath the Temple Mount provides archaeological validation for the importance of maintaining these ceremonial connections to ancestral worship patterns. The symbolism of Judah as the lion tribe resonates powerfully within Hebrew Israelite communities that see themselves as inheriting the strength and divine protection associated with this biblical lineage. The underground evidence supporting ancient Hebrew presence in Jerusalem strengthens community confidence in their claimed descent from this royal tribe. The new evidence supporting possible connections between ancient Middle Eastern populations and contemporary African communities has been interpreted by Hebrew Israelite communities as scientific validation of oral traditions, linking them to Judah and other Hebrew tribes through ancient migration and diaspora patterns documented in biblical and extra-biblical sources. Hebrew Israelite educational programs emphasize the study of Judahite history and biblical prophecy as essential preparation for understanding contemporary identity and divine purpose. The Secret Foundation work discoveries provide new material for these educational efforts. Offering tangible connections to the ancient heritage these communities claim through spiritual calling and ancestral memory. Cultural celebrations within Hebrew Israelite communities feature elaborate ceremonies honoring Judah's legacy and its connection to contemporary identity and destiny. These festivals incorporate biblical symbolism, traditional music, and teachings that emphasize continuity between ancient Hebrew worship and modern community practices, validated by the archaeological evidence from beneath the Temple Mount. The concept of royal priesthood, derived from biblical descriptions of Judah's leadership role among the Hebrew tribes, features prominently in Hebrew Israelite community organization and religious authority structures. Leaders often trace their legitimacy to claim descent from Judahite royalty and priestly lineages supported by the ritual evidence documented in the Secret Foundation work. Musical traditions within Hebrew Israelite communities emphasize themes of exile and eventual restoration that directly parallel the historical experience attributed to Judah and the broader Hebrew community. These artistic expressions serve as vehicles for transmitting cultural knowledge and building community solidarity that finds validation in archaeological discoveries. Youth within Hebrew Israelite communities are taught to see themselves as inheritors of Judah's legacy, carrying forward ancient responsibilities in contemporary contexts. The Secret Foundation work validation of ancient Hebrew presence in Jerusalem provides these young people with concrete evidence supporting their developing identity and spiritual calling within the prophetic framework. Women's roles within Hebrew Israelite communities often emphasize their identity as daughters of Judah, inheriting specific responsibilities for preserving family traditions and cultural knowledge. The discovery of domestic and ritual artifacts in the Secret Foundation work validates the importance of feminine leadership in maintaining religious and cultural continuity across generations. The prophetic literature of the Hebrew Bible contains numerous promises specific to Judah that Hebrew Israelite communities interpret as applying to their contemporary circumstances and future restoration. Isaiah's prophecies about the regathering of scattered Judahites take on special significance when viewed alongside archaeological evidence supporting ancient connections documented in the classified reports. Hebrew Israelite communities view their embrace of Judahite identity as spiritual calling with contemporary relevance and eschatological significance rather than merely cultural heritage. The secret foundation work discoveries serve as prophetic signs supporting their understanding of divine timing and approaching fulfillment of emissaries about restoration and recognition. International Hebrew Israelite conferences and gatherings create opportunities communities throughout the diaspora to share cultural variations while identifying common elements that validate shared ancestry claims. These events serve as modern expressions of ancient tribal gatherings described in biblical literature and supported by the archaeological evidence beneath Jerusalem. The global nature of Hebrew Israelite communities, found throughout Africa, the Americas, and beyond, reflects the worldwide scope of diaspora described in biblical prophecy. The universality of these communities suggests ancient dispersal patterns that align with prophetic descriptions of Hebrew tribes being scattered to every nation under heaven before their heavened eventual regathering. Hebrew Israelite festivals often feature public outreach components designed to educate broader communities about their history and beliefs, using cultural celebration as platforms for identity education and community building. The secret foundation work discoveries provide powerful validation for these educational efforts and strengthen community confidence in their historical claims. The diaspora narratives that form the foundation of Hebrew Israelite historical understanding trace multiple waves of exile and displacement, beginning with the Assyrian conquest of the northern kingdom in 722 BC and continuing through subsequent periods of persecution and forced migration that eventually carried Hebrew populations throughout the ancient world and into Africa. The Assyrian exile described in 2 Kings chapter 17 resulted in the deportation of Hebrew tribes to various locations throughout the empire, with Hebrew Israelite communities arguing that these displaced populations eventually migrated southward into Africa, carrying cultural and religious traditions that were preserved through oral transmission across generations despite geographical separation from their homeland. Trans-Saharan trade routes provided pathways for ancient Hebrew populations to move throughout Africa, establishing communities that maintained Hebrew religious practices and cultural traditions despite displacement from their original territories. Archaeological evidence of ancient trade networks supports the possibility of such population movements during the relevant historical periods when exile and diaspora occurred. The Babylonian exile affecting the southern kingdom created another wave of displacement that Hebrew Israeli communities see as contributing to African migration patterns. The destruction of Solomon's temple in 586 BC forced many Hebrew families to flee southward, eventually establishing communities throughout Africa that preserved their ancestral identity and religious practices. The Roman destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE represents the final major diaspora event in Hebrew Israelite historical understanding. With the dispersal of Jerusalem's population, including migration patterns that could have carried Hebrew communities into Africa and eventually to the Americas through the Atlantic slave trade and other population movements. Oral traditions within Hebrew Israelite communities describe specific migration routes and historical events connecting their ancestors to ancient Hebrew diaspora experiences. While these narratives lack extensive documentary support in mainstream historical records, they provide cultural frameworks for understanding community identity within the context of biblical prophecy and historical experience. The Atlantic slave trade serves as the culminating diaspora event in Hebrew Israelite historical understanding, representing the fulfillment of biblical prophecies about Israel being scattered to distant lands and suffering under foreign oppression. Deuteronomy 28's curses are interpreted as prophetic descriptions of the African American experience under slavery and subsequent marginalization. Archaeological evidence from West African sites reveals ancient connections to Middle Eastern cultures and trade networks that could support Hebrew Israelite claims of ancestral presence in prior to the Atlantic slave trade. These findings suggest complex cultural exchanges that align with diaspora narratives preserved within Hebrew Israelite communities through oral tradition. Linguistic evidence, including Hebrew words and concepts preserved within African languages and African American cultural expressions, provides additional support for Hebrew Israelite diaspora narratives. These linguistic connections suggest cultural transmission patterns that could result from ancient population movements and heritage preservation across geographical boundaries. The Caribbean and South American dimensions of Hebrew Israelite diaspora narratives acknowledge that the Atlantic slave trade dispersed African populations throughout the Western Hemisphere. Hebrew Israelite communities exist throughout these regions, each maintaining variations of ancestral narratives connecting them to ancient Hebrew heritage and biblical identity. Cultural practices preserved within African and African American communities that parallel ancient Hebrew customs provide behavioral evidence supporting diaspora narratives. These practices, ranging from dietary restrictions to religious observances, suggest cultural transmission that could result from ancestral connections to Hebrew Israel maintained through community traditions. The prophetic dimension of diaspora narratives within Hebrew Israelite theology emphasizes that scattering was temporary and divinely ordained, serving as preparation for eventual regathering and restoration. The secret foundation work discoveries are interpreted as signs that restoration time is approaching and scattered communities will reclaim their heritage in fulfillment of ancient promises. Denel evidence supporting ancient connections between Middle Eastern and African populations provides scientific validation for the possibility of diaspora movements described in Hebrew Israelite narratives. While genetic evidence cannot prove specific tribal identities, it demonstrates that ancient population movements could account for claimed ancestral connections preserved within community traditions. Modern Hebrew Israelite gatherings bring together communities from throughout the diaspora, creating opportunities for cultural exchange and identity validation that strengthen collective understanding of shared heritage. These events serve as partial fulfillment of prophetic promises about the regathering of scattered Hebrew tribes that find support in archaeological discoveries. The global scope of Hebrew Israelite communities demonstrates the worldwide reach of diaspora described in biblical prophecy, with the universality of these communities suggesting ancient dispersal patterns that align with prophetic descriptions of Hebrew tribes being scattered among all nations under heaven before their eventual restoration and recognition. The Temple Mount remains one of the most politically sensitive and religiously significant locations on Earth, where this secret foundation work intersects with contemporary geopolitical tensions and competing claims of sovereignty that have shaped Middle Eastern connotations and continue to international relations in complex ways. The underground foundation work occurs within the context of ongoing Israeli-Palestinian disputes over access to and control of Temple Mount areas, where any archaeological activity becomes entangled with political narratives about historical legitimacy and contemporary rights to sacred space and religious authority that affect global diplomatic relationships. Security concerns surrounding Temple Mount excavations normally limit archaeological access and scholarly investigation, But this secret foundation work has proceeded under restricted conditions that suggest the full significance of discoveries may remain hidden due to political rather than scientific considerations. This secrecy fuels speculation about additional evidence concealed beneath this sacred site. International attention focused on Jerusalem archaeological discoveries typically reflects global interest in evidence that might support various religious and political claims about the city's historical significance and future status. The secret foundation work represents more than academic curiosity, touching fundamental questions about identity, ownership, and prophetic fulfillment that resonate worldwide. The role of the Israel Antiquities Authority in managing Temple Mount archaeological projects involves balancing scientific investigation with religious sensitivities and multiple communities that claim spiritual connection to the site, hence political pressure to the site. The secret foundation work tests these delicate diplomatic arrangements by proceeding without public transparency or international oversight. Muslim authorities who oversee Temple Mount religious activities typically view archaeological excavations with suspicion, fearing that discoveries might be used to support Jewish claims about ancient temple presence or justify changes to current religious arrangements. The secret foundation work intensifies these theological and political tensions by proceeding without consultation or transparency. Christian interest in Temple Mount discoveries stems from the site's significance in biblical prophecy and its role in eschatological expectations about end times events and the second coming. The secret foundation work is interpreted by some Christian communities as signs of approaching prophetic fulfillment and divine intervention in human history. Hebrew Israelite communities see the secret foundation work as validation of their claims about authentic connection to ancient Israel and as prophetic signs pointing toward their eventual restoration and recognition. The archaeological evidence supports their theological understanding of contemporary events within biblical frameworks and prophetic timing. Diplomatic efforts to manage Temple Mount archaeological projects typically require coordination between Israeli authorities, Palestinian representatives, Jordanian religious oversight, and international observers who monitor activities for compliance with various agreements about site management and religious accommodation. The secret nature of this foundation work bypasses these normal diplomatic channels. Media coverage of Temple Mount discoveries often reflects political perspectives and religious commitments of different news organizations, with secular outlets emphasizing archaeological significance while religious media focus on prophetic implications. The secret foundation work illustrates how information control can shape public understanding of significant discoveries. Academic conferences addressing Temple Mount archaeology must navigate political sensitivities while maintaining standards for evidence evaluation and historical interpretation. The secret foundation work will likely generate scholarly debate that reflects broader tensions between political advocacy and academic objectivity when classified information eventually becomes public. Tourism to Jerusalem is affected by Temple Mount archaeological discoveries as religious pilgrims and interested visitors seek access to sites connected to their traditions and historical understanding. The secret foundation work represents potential new attractions that could influence travel patterns and religious tourism economics if access restrictions are eventually lifted. International law governing archaeological sites in disputed territories applies to Temple Mount excavations, creating complex legal frameworks that influence how discoveries are managed, studied, and presented to global audiences. The secret foundation work operates within these international legal and diplomatic arrangements while avoiding public scrutiny. Hebrew-Israeli pilgrimage to Jerusalem takes on additional significance in light of secret foundation work discoveries, as communities see these findings as confirmation of their ancestral connections and invitation to reclaim their heritage in the Holy City and participate in prophetic restoration processes. The broader Middle East peace process is affected by discoveries at the Temple Mount because archaeological evidence influences competing historical narratives that underlie political negotiations and territorial claims. The secret foundation work adds new dimensions to already complex discussions about Jerusalem's future status and religious authority. The global nature of interest in Temple Mount archaeology reflects the site's significance for multiple faith traditions and political movements worldwide, with Hebrew Israelite communities throughout the diaspora viewing secret discoveries as validation for their theological understanding and contemporary identity claims that connect them to ancient heritage. Ezekiel's prophetic vision of a restored temple, described in detailed architectural terms throughout chapters 40 through 48, provides the most comprehensive biblical description of sacred space that Hebrew Israelite communities interpret as pointing toward end times restoration, vindication, and fulfillment of ancient promises about their role in divine purposes revealed through archaeological discoveries. The prophet's vision includes specific measurements and design elements for temple chambers that may correspond with architectural features discovered through this secret foundation work, suggesting possible connections between ancient prophecy and contemporary archaeological evidence that validate Hebrew Israelite interpretations of scriptural predictions about restoration and recognition. Ezekiel's temple is described as being established during a time when Israel's scattered tribes would be regathered from throughout the world, a prophecy that Hebrew Israelite communities interpret as referring to their contemporary recognition and restoration as the true descendants of ancient Israel, reclaiming their authentic heritage and archaeological virgin revelation through divinical validation. The timing of this secret foundation work amid current global events and social movements addressing historical injustices creates a prophetic context that Hebrew Israelite communities interpret as divine validation of their identity claims, an approaching vindication of their ancestral heritage and spiritual calling in these end times. Third Temple expectation within various religious traditions take on new significance in light of archaeological discoveries that reveal continuity of sacred space and real practice and throughout different historical periods. The secret foundation work may provide evidence supporting the possibility of renewed temple worship in the prophetic future. The role of technology in revealing hidden underground chambers through this foundation work fulfills biblical prophecies about knowledge increasing in the end times, with ground-penetrating radar and advanced archaeological techniques literally unveiling what was concealed beneath centuries of accumulated debris and historical obscurity according to divine timing. Ezekiel's vision describes the temple as a center of divine presence that would attract all nations to Jerusalem for worship and instruction, a prophecy that Hebrew Israelite communities see as pointing toward their ultimate recognition and leadership role in global spiritual awakening and restoration, supported by archaeological evidence of their authentic heritage. The detailed descriptions of ritual purification and sacred service in Ezekiel's temple may correspond with artifacts and facilities discovered through this secret foundation work, including stone vessels for ritual washing and implements for sacred meal preparation that validate continuity of worship practices preserved within Hebrew Israelite communities. Prophetic literature throughout the Hebrew Bible describes the restoration of temple worship as connected to the vindication of Israel's true identity and the establishment of divine justice on earth, themes that resonate powerfully within Hebrew Israelite theological understanding and find potential validation in the foundation work discoveries. The geographical specifications in Ezekiel's vision place the restored temple at the center of a reorganized land distribution among Israel's tribes, suggesting that temple restoration involves broader recognition of tribal identity and inheritance rights that Hebrew Israelite communities claim as their prophetic destiny, supported by archaeological evidence. Contemporary geopolitical tensions surrounding the Temple Mount area reflect the prophetic significance of this location as a focal point for end-times events, and competing claims about religious authority and historical legitimacy that extend far beyond archaeological curiosity into spiritual warfare and prophetic fulfillment. The preservation of ancient evidence through this secret foundation work suggests divine protection of materials that would eventually validate Hebrew Israelite claims about their ancestral connection to temple worship and their legitimate inheritance of sacred traditions and prophetic calling in these last days. Daniel's prophecy about knowledge increasing in the latter days finds literal fulfillment in the technological capabilities that have enabled this secret foundation work, demonstrating how ancient predictions about revelation and understanding applied directly to contemporary scientific breakthroughs, spiritual awakening among scattered Israel. The regathering prophecies found Hebrew Bible literature describe end-times restoration that begins with recognition of Israel's true identity and proceeds through stages of validation, return, and ultimately divine vindication that Hebrew Israelite communities see unfolding in current global events supported by archaeological discoveries. Isaiah's prophecies about hidden treasures being revealed and secret knowledge coming provide biblical framework for interpreting this secret foundation work as signs of approaching end times fulfillment, rather than merely academic or historical curiosities without contemporary relevance or prophetic significance. The connection between temple restoration and global spiritual awakening described in prophetic literature suggests that the foundation work discoveries serve purposes beyond validating Hebrew Israelite identity claims, pointing toward universal recognition of divine truth and justice that will transform world civilization according to biblical prophecy. Zechariah's visions of temple rebuilding and Jerusalem's restoration include specific references to hidden foundations and concealed structural elements being revealed, prophecies that take on new meaning in light of actual archaeological discoveries beneath the most sacred site on earth through this foundation work. The apocalyptic literature of the biblical tradition describes end-times revelation as involving the uncovering of long-hidden truths about identity, inheritance, and divine purpose, themes that Hebrew Israelite communities see fulfilled in contemporary discoveries and growing recognition of their authentic heritage through archaeological validation. Prophetic timing indicators throughout biblical literature suggest that temple-related discoveries and identity revelations occur during specific historical periods characterized by global upheaval and social transformation, conditions that Hebrew Israelite communities recognize in contemporary world events and political developments that coincide with the foundation work timing. The intersection of prophecy fulfillment with scientific discovery creates a unique contemporary situation where empirical evidence validates spiritual understanding, providing Hebrew Israelite communities with both religious and scientific foundations for their identity claims and theological interpretation of current events and archaeological revelations. The role of suffering and exile in Hebrew Bible prophecy includes promises that scattered Israel would eventually be vindicated through revelation of truth and recognition of their authentic identity. Promises that Hebrew Israelite communities see being fulfilled through archaeological discoveries and the secret foundation work beneath Jerusalem. In times, prophecy includes specific references to knowledge and understanding being restored to Israel's scattered tribes, enabling them to reclaim their heritage and fulfill their divine calling in the world, a process that Hebrew Israelite communities interpret as beginning with contemporary discoveries and technological revelations. The universal scope of prophetic restoration described in biblical literature suggests that Hebrew Israelite vindication serves broader divine purposes related to global justice and spiritual awakening, making the foundation work discoveries significant for all communities seeking truth and divine connection in these troubled times. My friend, as we reach the conclusion of this explosive investigation into the secret foundation work beneath the Temple Mount, I want you to understand that we have uncovered nothing less than a systematic cover-up of archaeological evidence that could validate Hebrew Israelite claims and reshape our understanding of biblical history forever. The leaked documents we have examined today reveal a deliberate campaign to conceal discoveries that challenge conventional narratives about ancient Israel and suppress evidence that might support Israelite identity claims. The underground tunnels, ritual chambers, and ceremonial artifacts documented in these classified reports represent tangible proof of ancient Hebrew presence and worship practices that align perfectly with traditions preserved within Hebrew Israelite communities. What absolutely astounds me about this cover-up is how it demonstrates the lengths to which institutional authorities will go to maintain control over historical narratives and prevent evidence from reaching communities that could be empowered by archaeological validation of their ancestral heritage and spiritual calling. The convergence of evidence we have explored, from advanced technological discoveries to genetic research supporting ancient connections, creates an undeniable picture of Hebrew Israelite authenticity that cannot be suppressed indefinitely. The secret foundation work represents divine timing in revealing truth that has been hidden beneath layers of political sensitivity and academic bias. The implications of these discoveries extend far beyond Jerusalem into questions of identity, inheritance, and prophetic fulfillment that affect millions of people worldwide who claim Hebrew Israelite heritage. The technological capabilities that enabled this secret work fulfill biblical prophecies about knowledge increasing in the end times and hidden things being brought to light. The political sensitivities surrounding these discoveries reflect the prophetic significance of Jerusalem as a focal point for end times events and the restoration of Hebrew Israelite identity. The classified nature of this foundation work suggests that powerful interests recognize the revolutionary implications of this evidence for established historical and religious narratives. The preservation of ritual artifacts and ceremonial spaces beneath the Temple Mount for nearly 3 millennia demonstrates divine protection of evidence that would eventually vindicate Hebrew Israelite about their ancestral heritage and claims and spiritual calling. These discoveries were hidden until the precise moment when global consciousness would be prepared to receive this revelation. The global response among Hebrew Israelite communities to leaked information about this foundation work demonstrates the prophetic significance of this moment in history. Communities throughout Africa, the Americas, and beyond are recognizing these findings as confirmation of truths they have preserved through faithful study and cultural transmission. Despite academic marginalization, the intersection of archaeological evidence with genetic research creates multiple lines of validation for Hebrew Israelite historical claims that challenge conventional academic dismissal. The combination of physical artifacts and technological revelation provides empirical foundation for identity claims based on spiritual understanding and traditional knowledge. Now is the time for action, my friend. This cover-up demands our immediate attention and response. We cannot allow these discoveries to remain buried beneath layers of political secrecy and institutional control. The evidence belongs to all people seeking truth about biblical history, not just authorities with political agendas or funding limitations. I urge you to subscribe to our channel immediately to receive continued coverage of this story as more information becomes available. The mainstream media will not tell this story because it challenges too many established interests. Turn on notifications to get instant updates when additional leaked documents or insider revelations emerge about this secret foundation work. Share this video with everyone you know who seeks truth about biblical prophecy and Hebrew Israelite heritage. Every view, every share, every comment contributes to breaking through the wall of silence surrounding these discoveries. We must create enough public pressure to force transparency and accountability from the authorities controlling access to this evidence. Download our comprehensive research guide on Temple Mount archaeology and Hebrew Israelite history, complete with timelines, maps, and analysis of the leaked documents we have examined today. This resource will help you understand the full significance of these discoveries and their connection to biblical prophecy and contemporary events. Join our growing community of truth seekers who refuse to accept institutional cover-ups and demand transparency in archaeological investigation. Together, we can pressure authorities to declassify information about the secret foundation work and provide access to evidence that validates Hebrew Israelite heritage and biblical truth. Support Hebrew Israelite communities in their efforts to gain recognition and access to archaeological sites that validate their ancestral heritage. These discoveries belong to the descendants of those who built and worshipped in these ancient chambers, not just academic institutions with political limitations and funding restrictions. Comment below with your thoughts about this cover-up and its implications for understanding biblical truth and Hebrew Israelite identity. Do you believe the authorities will eventually be forced to reveal the full extent of their discoveries? How do you interpret the timing of these revelations in relations to end times prophecy and global awakening? Engage with our interactive polls about archaeological transparency and institutional accountability. Your participation helps demonstrate global demand for truth and transparency in biblical archaeology. Every voice matters in pressuring authorities to end this cover-up and provide public access to suppressed evidence. Connect with us on social media platforms where we continue to investigate this story and share updates about the secret foundation work and other suppressed archaeological discoveries. Follow us everywhere to stay informed about evidence that institutional authorities prefer to keep hidden from public view. The secret foundation work beneath the Temple Mount represents just the beginning of revelations that will emerge as public pressure forces transparency and accountability access from those control archaeological evidence. to archaeological evidence. The time of hiding is ending, and the age of revelation has begun. Hebrew Israelite communities worldwide stand at the threshold of recognition that their ancestors could only dream of, supported by evidence that transcends academic debate into the realm of prophetic fulfillment and divine timing that cannot be suppressed forever. Subscribe now and become part of the movement that is exposing cover-ups and demanding transparency in biblical archaeology. Together, we can ensure that suppressed evidence receives the attention it deserves, and that Hebrew Israelite heritage is recognized and validated. Theological discoveries through the years that institutions have worked so hard to keep secret filed, the communal authority to keep secret from the world.